Hey guys, it's Malcolm Taylor with you again. You know what? We're in this excuseless series, and this is dealing with mental health. But you know, when I was growing up, we used to say certain things like this. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. And then there was another thing I used to say as well. I'm rubber, you're glue, whatever you say bounces off me and sticks to you. But you know what, guys? I want to be honest. Words do hurt. They really do hurt. And they can live and last with us for a lifetime. But you know, in the book of Proverbs and even in the book of James, it tells us that there's life and death in the power of the tongue. So what I want us to know today is that we can speak life into ourselves, or we could even speak death into ourselves. And what I love about it in Proverbs 18, it tells us that there's fruit in those words as well. And we eat on it, right? So don't you want to eat the best fruit? And those are positive words that bring us through. So yes, we can. Yes, we can do it. And yes, we are in an excuseless series, and we need to know that there's power in the tongue. So with you guys, with myself, I'm going to speak life into myself with the words that God has given me. And I know He loves me and He loves you too. So remember that, guys. There's life and death in the power of the tongue. And what fruit of your tongue are you going to eat? And what fruit of someone else's tongue will you accept as a meal as well? So with that, guys, we love you and keep moving forward.
The information shared in this show is for the sole purpose of being informative, should not be considered complete, and does not cover all issues related to mental health. This information should not replace consultations with your doctor, other qualified mental health providers, and/or specialists. If you believe you or another individual is suffering from a mental health crisis or other medical emergencies, contact your doctor immediately, seek medical attention immediately in an emergency room, or emergency mental health services. Hey there, my Excuses family. We are so excited to have you with us today in our very relaxed, excuseless studio space. Over the past few weeks, we have been talking about being excuseless spiritually. We talked about being excuseless physically, and now we are wanting for us to be in a space where we make no more excuses for caring about our mental health. I'm so excited in the studio that we have Dr. Martin Hodnett. He is an associate professor at Oakwood University and chair of the Psychological Sciences Department. I believe I said that right. Did I say that right?
Correct.
We are here today to talk about something that I think is very important, and that is emotional fatigue. Mm-hmm. But you know what, Dr. Hodnett, before we get started, I do want to make a note that, listen, this space is about education. It is about informing. It's not meant to diagnose anything, and we want to make sure that you have identified the proper people or doctors or therapists in order to help you as you navigate your own mental health. But I just want to jump right in and get started. Listen, emotional fatigue, you and I were talking earlier, and I was like, this is my favorite subject. You were a little surprised when I said that.
Yeah.
But I think it's very important. What are some ways that, let's first talk about, that term emotional fatigue. How do we identify what emotional fatigue is?
Yeah, thank you. I think when we think about emotional fatigue, one of the things we think about that comes to mind is typically anyone who is caring for someone, parents, children. A lot of times we think of first responders or anyone in the health fields or mental health fields, people who are constantly giving of themselves and having to allow people to have space to express their emotions, typically after a while, you'll find that your cup begins to run out a bit. And so oftentimes what we'll notice is that a person who's dealing with compassion fatigue and emotional fatigue, a lot of times they will begin to have typically two things happen. You might see some burnout as well as also in some cases you might even have what we call secondary trauma. So that someone who is helping someone through some traumatic experience themselves can experience some secondary trauma. So typically, when we think about that, we have to be aware that this really could happen to anyone who is trying to assist and help someone.
So you mentioned there are so many things to even like attack there. So I do want to dive a little bit into, you talked about the caregiving piece. We have probably many individuals and even myself I have a daughter that has a very severe chronic illness. You have people that are caring for their seniored parents or a loved one that may be ill. How are ways that a caregiver can navigate that emotional fatigue when it seems like there's no break in sight?
Yeah, I myself can relate to that in that before my father passed, our family dealt with multiple sclerosis and a 30-year journey through that with him. And one of the things I observed, my mom, who was a stalwart in our home, caring for him, was that making sure that there was times to step away. Something I had never heard of, but she would make sure that from time to time she would have respite care. Which would mean that someone else would care for him during the time that she needed to be away to replenish, to rejuvenate, and to have a time where she could come back refreshed. As I mentioned earlier, if you're pouring from a cup, eventually, unless you replenish that cup, it's going to run out.
And when you are maybe in a situation where a person that caregiver is in that room where that diagnosis is happening or that diagnosis comes through, is that a good time before everything really starts happening to say, how can I identify other individuals to help me through this journey to keep that from happening?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent idea, actually, to have a list perhaps of people that you can call upon to assist, either with the care, have a list of people who you can call to assist with the care of that person, that loved one, but also have a list of people that you can turn to. And it may not necessarily be just unburdening your soul and talking about the things that are going through, but sometimes it just may need to be something that you're doing that you find to be enjoyable. Something that you kind of replenishes you, some hobby, something to in some way get your mind off of things and allow you to experience joy in other areas of your life. So you remain a well-rounded person and that you don't put all of your energies into caring for that one person, because that oftentimes is one of the things that leads to burnout.
So we know the things that can lead to it. How does a person or I myself or maybe some of our viewers out there, how would they know, hey, I think I'm suffering from some emotional fatigue there. What are some signs that can like almost immediately?
Sure. Well, I think one of the ways that you can know is there a change in your demeanor? Oftentimes the people who are closest to us can tell when something's off. Are you noticing a change in terms of your patience? Are you a little bit more irritable than normal? Do you find that you have more of a sense of perhaps hopelessness, or you're down a little bit more, or even you find that there's a lessening of the compassion that you would typically extend to your loved one? And so when that happens, you know that something is off, and that's a good indicator, much like you see in your car where the gauge will go down to E. That's the indicator that the gauge is going down to E.
Exactly. Yeah, and I find too that a lot of times there are people out there that may push past. What are some other harmful ways? Because we know that that's harmful, obviously. But what are some other harmful things that can happen when a person may be recognizing the emotional fatigue, but they're just like, I can't deal with this right now, or I don't have time. What are some harmful things that are a result of saying that?
Well, when you say that, it makes me think of, like when you're in an airline and they'll tell you to put on your mask first before helping someone else. And the
Yes.
idea is that you need to be whole and well enough to help somebody else. And I think when you press past that, you are putting your own, not only mental, but also physical health in jeopardy. One of the things we know about caregivers is that they are under extreme stress. And
Yes.
so they have to have time to be able to have a break and to be able to replenish. And if they don't do that, one of the things that you can find out is that due to prolonged stress, we know that stress is a killer,
Yeah.
but due to prolonged stress, it can have negative effects in terms of chronic diseases, mental health issues, and other things, which then, if you really think about it, is taking you out of the game
Yes.
of being able to provide the service and love to your loved ones. So in order to have that longevity, one has to take care of themselves, or they're not going to be able to care for the person that they love.
And that makes so much sense, because essentially, if I'm saying I don't have time to take the time away, if
Yeah.
I'm feeling this emotional fatigue, eventually I'm going to have to take the time away, because it's going to lead to
Yeah.
other issues, whether it's my own health, physical health. And we see that a lot. I know there are many caregivers out there, people that take care of parents, where their own physical health declines immediately.
Yes.
And it can
Yes.
start obviously from a mental health perspective.
Yeah.
So let me ask you something, because this is always interesting to me. You know, we've been doing this Excuseless campaign, and we've been dealing with physical health,
Yeah.
and we've been dealing with spiritual health, and it's about creating these healthy habits in order to ensure that you know, we are excuseless in that phase. And it's easy for us to say, in order for me to not have physical fatigue, I need to warm up. You know, when we had our workouts, our coaches had us warming up. We had cool downs. And once you begin to work out every day, you notice that you are less likely to have that physical fatigue, because you have trained your body to continue to do that. Is that possible to do with emotional fatigue? Is there something that I can do every day that eventually will help, you know, maintain my stamina when it
Yeah.
comes to my emotional fatigue?
Yeah, you know, the thing that I like to talk about specifically when it comes to this kind of thing is the idea that all the elements that you mentioned, mental, physical, and emotional, they're all connected. Spiritual, they're all connected. And so a deficit or a strain on one can impact the other. I'll go back to the example of my mom. She told me that during the time that she was caring for my dad, that one of the things that she would do every day was to make sure that she had a robust and a consistent prayer and devotional life. And what she told me from that was that it allowed her to be able to not just care for my dad, but do so with love. Anyone who has done prolonged care for a loved one will find that over time it can begin to drain your emotional and personal resources. And so to be able to have that time to replenish is essential. So when you think about it, you think about the fruit of the Spirit. The very first one that's mentioned is love.
Yeah.
And so when you think about the fact that you're asking each day for God to fill you with His Spirit, you're asking Him to give you the love you need
Yeah.
to care for that person. You ask Him to give you the patience that you need, and all the other fruit that God's Spirit will give you is key. The other thing I think that one can do, especially to help them be able to deal with caretaking and caregiving on the long haul, is to find time to withdraw. And this is related to what I was just saying, but it's a little bit different.
Okay.
In that, when you look at the life of Christ, there's one particular time He was with His disciples. People were coming and going to the extent that they didn't even have time to eat.
Yeah.
So what He said to His disciples is come aside and let's rest a while. And during that time, they withdrew from all the demands that were upon them for ministry. Good things now.
Yeah.
Good things. But they withdrew from it, and it allowed them to reconnect with Christ. It allowed them to get the things that they needed on the soul level. It allowed for them to receive instruction to be able to minister better.
Yes.
And so when they came from that experience, then they were replenished enough to provide the care and the resources that the people needed. But I think in some cases, we can become so focused on doing the task that we underestimate the importance of rest. And I think in order to really understand what it takes to be able to provide that care, you have to value the rest, because if you don't, you're going to run out.
Wow, that's so huge, because I think we forget a lot of times, especially when we use the example of Jesus, we will often, think, oh, well, Jesus did this and I want to be more like Christ.
Yeah.
But we take away the fact that he did actually withdraw. He actually took breaks, because he literally had the weight of the world on his shoulders.
Yeah.
And so it's important for people to do the same. So from the outside, if I am a person that is observing another individual, how do I recognize the emotional fatigue in them? And then after I recognize that, how do I then say, hey, I think maybe might be what's going on?
Yeah. One of the ways is, if you really know the person well, you know what baseline is for them.
Yeah.
You know what baseline is for them. And if you can see that they're becoming worn down, you can tell in their countenance, their face, if they're becoming worn down, if they're becoming, perhaps as I mentioned earlier, if they become a little bit more irritable, not as quite as patient as before, detached to the extent that they don't really seem to be involved and invested and caring in the same level that they would have before, you can know that something's probably up. And really, one of the best things you can do is ask them, how can I help? I've seen in cases where people may have lost a loved one, someone will say, oh, is there anything I can do, or if there's anything I can do? And that's great, but it's a bit general.
Yes.
And so if you go to a person and say, I have some ideas, maybe I can help you with this, or I can help you with that, what would be useful and helpful for you?
Absolutely.
In this situation, that's a great starting point, because it then allows a person to be able to tell you what's helpful for them, because what's helpful for one person may not be helpful for somebody else.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we talked about the caregiving side, which is, to me, one of the more obvious ways that a person will find themselves emotional fatigue. I want to switch gears a little bit, because there are some other ways that people can find themselves in an emotional fatigue situation. How does a person, if they find themselves dealing with, the person doesn't need care, they're not ill, it's a friend or an acquaintance that every time they come into that person's presence, they are drawing out energy that eventually leads to that emotional fatigue. How does one deal with situations like that?
Yeah, I think one of the first things is you have to identify who these people are. Yeah. and be honest about what's happening. I think sometimes we do ourselves a disservice when we are not honest about what we're seeing, what we're feeling, what we're experiencing when we're in the presence of others. And so being honest with yourself about what is taking place, and then prayerfully seek a resolution. A resolution, what I mean by that is to seek, what is it this person is needing from me? Does this person have other areas where they could, if possible, seek empathy and sympathy and a listening ear? And if you see that person is leaning so heavily on you, and maybe not other places, that might be a good indication that you might, with love, and respectfully, yes, suggest, I noticed that this dynamic is taking place, and I wonder if you might benefit from a professional, someone who's trained, and that might be able to assist you further. It's great to be able to have someone to listen to, and to have that catharsis of being able to get something off your chest. But sometimes it needs to go beyond just getting it off your chest.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That's a great thing, because I think we have a lot of individuals out there that will have those friends or those loved ones where, every time the cell phone rings, you're like, oh, here's this person. Yeah. And that may be a good indication, like, what are they drawing from me, or how much, or even if by the time, you get off the phone with that person, or by the time you finish reading the text message, you're just like, you're completely undone.
You're here.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think in that regard, one of the things that we have to be aware of is that when you're working with people, friends, family, loved ones, we need to have proper boundaries. We noticed that Christ, when he said, come aside and rest a while, he's putting up boundaries. That's exactly what he's doing. Yeah. He's saying, I need this time away. And so when we are dealing with loved ones or individuals who we feel are really kind of draining us, and I say that because it's more than normal or more than you normally expect, At that point, you might need to say, what boundaries do I need to put in place that are not only for my best good, but for this other person's best good? Because it could be that they're relying on you too heavily, and then that might be in some way preventing them from growing in areas that they need to grow.
Wow, yeah. So we have the caregiver piece, and we have, where we recognize that we're dealing with emotional fatigue when it comes to friends or acquaintances. I would love to just take a few moments too, Dr. Hodnett, and talk to some of the actual professionals, yourself. We have pastors out there. We have people that work in the church that are constantly dealing with individuals that come to them, especially for our ministers out there, our psychological science professors, or professionals out there. How can a professional in the field where they are constantly dealing with people, they are constantly hearing what is happening at home, what are some things they can do to avoid that emotional fatigue or that emotional burnout?
Yeah. One of the things I find is that when we're talking about people who are in those spaces, and even sometimes you might even have, members of the church who are involved in different things, I think sometimes we have to step back and ask, why am I doing this?
Ooh.
Okay. And I say that because not in terms of, why am I, do I have this particular job or position, but why am I choosing to engage in this helping behavior at this time? And one of the things I find is that if one continues to always be available, always run and trying to help everyone, after a while, not only do you become less effective, you burn out. So one of the things I would suggest is that, and this may sound trite, but to be prayerful about who and when you help.
Wow.
Now, you might say, well, that doesn't make sense. We're supposed to help everybody, right? This is how Jesus was. Well, actually, when we look at the life of Christ, particularly, I think it's in John 5, when he approaches the man at the pool of Bethesda, he is in prayerful meditation, and he walks past many people who needed help and goes to this one man and asks him, do you want to be made whole? Yeah. He doesn't heal everybody else there, and which in my mind speaks to the fact that we have to be aware that not everything that we could do, we should do.
Wow.
Now, that doesn't mean that we're, not helping people and we're just, walking past people. But the idea being is that, and I've heard it mentioned in some of the prior programs, is that our yes is a no. So when we say yes to one thing, that means that we're not able then to do something else.
Right.
And so the idea being is that if God has you in place to help someone over here, and you've said yes to all these other things, you're no longer available for the thing that he has destined and designed you to do.
Wow, wow.
So I think in that regard, when we're looking at what things should we do, we have to ask ourselves, why are we doing these things? And is this something that God himself would have me do? Because oftentimes we burn ourselves out doing all these other things, and sometimes it's fulfilling a need that we have. A need for relevance, a need for appreciation, a need for validation. And we're looking to get all these things because, man, that person is working so hard. They're doing all these things in church, they're doing all these things for God. And the reality, the person may have other motives that are motivating them to do all those things.
And oftentimes too, you talked about that cup being empty. It may be a case where that they're seeking to fill that up, but in the wrong way.
In the wrong way.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, ultimately, the only legitimate way that you can have your cup filled is by going to the source.
Wow. Yeah.
Anything less, it's something that really doesn't actually hit the bill or fit the bill of what you really need.
This is so incredible. And I think sometimes too, because when people think about emotional fatigue, they may, I was joking earlier when I say, I'll look at some things like, ooh, I don't have the bandwidth to deal with this right now. Is that okay to say? Because a lot of times I think too, when you're a caregiver, or when you're a friend, or when you're a professional, when you're a pastor, when you're in ministry, and you just said that you have that feeling like you don't want to leave that one person. And so is it okay to just say, hey, I don't have the capacity to deal with this situation right now, just like that? Is that okay for us to say? And then how do we then identify when our cup is, back filled up?
Yeah, I think it absolutely is okay. I mean, ultimately, you have to ask yourself, if I indeed try to meet this person's need and I'm already running on empty, what's going to happen? Okay. One of the things I find is that if I am trying to meet someone's need and maybe I haven't eaten, people who know me, I'm like those commercials, I'm not myself when I'm hungry.
Yeah, I think a lot of us are.
So if I'm trying to minister or serve from that space, I might not be as nice. I might not be as kind or compassionate or patient.
Yeah.
And so if indeed you are pressing past what should be the line, then at that point, sometimes your good may be evil spoken of, in that it's not necessarily good.
Yeah.
You know, I think some of us have, you know, there's a whole lot of people talk about church hurt. Well, I think some of that comes from people who are either having experienced traumas and they're living that out, or in some cases they may be tired or have their own issues. And if you're trying to minister from that space of emptiness, no good can come of it.
Yeah.
No good can come of it.
Absolutely. That's incredible. Listen, this has been an incredible conversation. I know it'll be helpful for a lot of people out there. We just want to take these last few minutes, and I would love for you to kind of just maybe give people 3 or 4 things they can do to help manage their emotional fatigue as they continue to navigate their excuseless space.
Yeah. So one of the things I think we can do is to first identify who are the essential individuals or recipients of our compassion or our service. In many cases, for those who are caregivers or people who have loved ones in their home, their children, their parents, those are essential individuals that you would have to provide care for. Secondly, I think one of the things that we need to do is to identify what are some of the markers or some of the things that lets us know when we are reaching our tipping point. Perhaps we are changing our abilities to be able to serve them in the way that we would normally do so. And so once we begin to identify what are some red flags to let me know I'm almost on E and I need some time away, that's an indicator that you may need to make a change. So then additionally, we need to find what are those things that we can do in order to replenish ourselves. Within the last several years, one of the things that's been more popular in the popular media is the idea of self-care. And so finding those things and having perhaps even a list of things that you can do, people that you can turn to, activities that you can engage in, and not wait until you get to a place where you are already at the edge, is an ideal that we can pursue. And I think as we do so, we have those things in place such that when we do get to a place where our cup is empty, we will be better served, and not only will we be better served, but also those who we are serving will receive the best version of us, and we can represent Christ in a meaningful way.
I love that. That is so incredible. Listen, we have dealt with emotional fatigue as it comes to caregivers, professionals, pastors, as a friend, as a loved one, as a person that may be on the receiving end of that. And we want you to be able to take this knowledge, to take this informational conversation and be able to see how it can apply in your own life. Of course, we want you to be able to identify your professionals, your healthcare, your mental care professionals out there to help you navigate that space as we continue on this journey for our mental health to become excuseless.
What's good, everybody? The excuseless revolution is underway and lives are being radically changed. There are some of you that have the hard copy of the book. There's some that have the ebook. But I want you to know we've heard the call and the audiobook is now available on Audible. There are some of us that need to see the word. Some of us need to hear it, but however you receive it, God be praised. I want to encourage you to go on to Audible, get your version, and continue the journey of becoming excuseless. Hello, I'm Pastor Deblier Snell, Speaker Director for the Breath of Life television ministry. This ministry was established to take the gospel of Jesus Christ throughout North America and across the globe. My goal is to make Jesus Christ known through the preaching of the word. I need you to know that we need your financial partnership in order to make sure that the gospel can go into every hill, into every rural county, and into every inner city. And we can only take the gospel as far as the gifts that you lend to us. We thank you for your financial partnership in the past, and I'm asking that you would continue to be a financial partner with this ministry going forward. Here are some ways you can give. You can give online at our website at www.breathoflife.tv. You can send your gift by mail to Breath of Life, P.O. Box 5960, Huntsville, Alabama 35814. You can call the office at 256-929-6460, or you can text the phrase "Give to BOLTV" to 188-364-GIVE, or the easiest thing is through Cash App at $Breath of Life TV. I want you to know that every dime that you give goes right back into the ministry so that we can enlarge our reach and make sure that the entire world knows that Jesus saves and that Jesus Christ is coming again. God bless you, and we thank you for your generosity to the Breath of Life ministry.